What's up, guys? I'm LQ. This is the LQ Review. Thank you so much for joining me here at my YouTube channel. This is where we talk about the geeky, nerdy stuff that we love to talk about. Movies, video games, comic books, TV shows. And right now, I want to give you guys my ranking of the 4 Ghostbusters movies. So yes, I've seen Afterlife. I loved it. I thought it was great. It's maybe my favorite movie of the year. Haven't seen Spider-Man yet, so we'll see how that goes. But I loved it. I thought it was done with passion, with reverence. It's perfect. It's perfect. So let's put these 4 movies in order from worst to best. I'm a huge Ghostbusters fan, as I showed in my Ghostbusters Afterlife review. This isn't all of my Ghostbuster toys. I've got a lot. But this is one that I do have out. Big fan of Ghostbusters. So let's rank them. Starting at number 4 is Ghostbusters 2016, or Ghostbusters Answer the Call. Now, when this movie came out, I was angry. I was angry at it. I hated it. I had disdain for this. I lamented the fact that this movie existed. Time has made me more fond of it, though. Now, I still don't like it. It's not a good movie. But through time, and honestly, through the fact that Ghostbusters Afterlife exists, I've now been able to look at Ghostbusters Answer the Call as not a Ghostbusters movie. It's not a Ghostbusters movie. It's a extended SNL Ghostbusters skit. And if I approach it from that perspective, there's stuff to enjoy in this. Some of the jokes are funny. Some of what Chris Hemsworth does, some of what he brings to the table is funny and entertaining. Now, it's a man-hating movie. Nobody will ever be able to convince me it's not a man-hating movie. Every man in the movie is either an idiot or a bad person. Every single one. I've watched it specifically to evaluate the male characters in the movie. Every single one of them is either an idiot or a bad person. Every one. And how do they kill the bad guy at the end? They shoot it in the man region. They shoot it in the man region. It's a man-hating movie. However you want to spin it, that it's not, it is. But there are some jokes in it that work for me as long as I approach it from the perspective that it is an SNL Ghostbusters skit. That's the only way it works for me. As a Ghostbusters movie, it fails on every single level. You can't watch it as a Ghostbusters movie because it's not. It's an extended SNL Ghostbusters skit. Let's move on. Let's move on. Number 3. Number 3 is Ghostbusters 2. Now, I said this in my review of Ghostbusters Afterlife. I watched Ghostbusters 2 in theaters when I was 9 years old, and I had a love for this movie. You know, I was 9. I loved Ghostbusters already when Ghostbusters 2 came out. So when it came out, it could have been anything, and I would have loved it. As long as it had the Ghostbusters in it and they were busting ghosts, I would have loved it. Because I was not a critical... I didn't have any kind of critical eye, especially when it came to the properties that I loved when I was 9 years old. If it came out and the Ghostbusters were busting ghosts, I was going to love it. So I grew up loving Ghostbusters 2 and watching it and watching it and watching it and watching it. And then as I became an adult, became a movie fan, and started critically looking at movies, you know, I realized that this movie has a lot of problems. This is a movie that undid a lot of what happened in the first movie just for the sake of repeating the same beats as the first movie. And a lot of it was done in a soulless manner. You know, it was kind of just the creators going through the beats. And it felt like there wasn't the same passion behind it as there was behind the first one. And that was something that showed in the making. Doesn't mean I don't like it. I still love the movie because of the nostalgia that I have tied to it. But from a critical eye, it is not the best Ghostbusters movie. But there's a lot of classical stuff in this that we love. You know, the Statue of Liberty, the dancing toaster, the River of Slime, Vigo the Carpathian, Ray being possessed by Vigo the Carpathian, you know, the bad guy, Janos. There's stuff that is intrinsically tied to this movie. And when you think about this movie, there's things that immediately pop into your brain because they are, again, intrinsically tied to this movie. I think about Ghostbusters 2, I think about Vigo the Carpathian, I think about Janos, I think about the River of Slime, I think about the slime covering the art museum. I think about the Scoleri brothers. You know, to say that there was no creativity or passion behind this, I think that's missing the boat. You know, my son loves the scene in Ghostbusters 2. They said the Titanic just arrived, and then better late than never. I mean, there's good stuff here, but the problem is, and I do believe it was done with some passion and some heart, but the problem is that the enthusiasm, the love, wasn't there. And the decisions to undo stuff from the first movie just so they can hit the same beats as the first movie. That just, it felt lazy. That might be the best way to talk about Ghostbusters 2. It was lazy. So let's move on. That's number 3. Let's move on to my second favorite Ghostbusters movie, and it is Ghostbusters Afterlife. Ghostbusters Afterlife is phenomenal. I loved it. I think that it is the you know, I've talked about this before. Right before I went to see Ghostbusters Afterlife, I talked to some of my students about this. I said, I've been waiting 32 years for Ghostbusters 3. I thought we'd never get it. You know, at one point we were going to, in the 90s, we were going to get Ghostbusters in Hell. At one point we thought the 2016 reboot was actually going to be a sequel just with girls picking up the torch, and it was going to be a torch passing type movie. You know, but really, kind of deep down in my soul, I always kind of felt like Ghostbusters 3 was never going to happen. 32 years from the point of sitting in the theater, and I remember I was 9 years old sitting in that theater, and I looked up at Mom and Dad after it was over, and I said, I love Ghostbusters 2, I can't wait till Part 3 comes out. 32 years later, here we are. I finally got to go see a legitimate Ghostbusters 3, and I loved it. And they brought the nostalgia, and they brought the beats, and they brought, you know, it wasn't a beat-for-beat Ghostbusters movie. It did its own thing. It forged its own path, but it was still, at its DNA, it was still Ghostbusters. I loved it. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on it, check out my review on Ghostbusters Afterlife. It should be up by now, but I loved it. Ghostbusters Afterlife, number 2. But number 1, and this should be no surprise to anybody, is the first Ghostbusters. It's almost a perfect movie. It really is. I mean, it was like they brought together all these ingredients, and somehow, despite themselves and despite the issues that they were having, if you haven't seen the episode of The Movies That Made Us that goes over Ghostbusters, you really should watch it, because it goes into just what kind of a troubled production this was. But despite themselves, and despite some of the problems that they had and some of the problems that they created for themselves, they still managed a perfect movie out of it. The comedy, the horror elements, the special effects, I mean, it was all ahead of its time. It was trailblazing. And for me, Ghostbusters, if I were to ever create a top 100 list of movies, which is something I've toyed with in the past, but if I were to ever create that, Ghostbusters would be high on the list, because it is just a perfect film. How would you rank the 4 Ghostbusters movies? Let me know in the comments down below. While you're down there commenting, make sure you subscribe to my channel. And as always, thank you so much for joining me right here at the LQ Review, where we get to talk about all the geeky, nerdy stuff we love to talk about. Till next time, we'll see you guys later. Hey guys, it's LQ with the LQ Review. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me.